everyone, welcome back. You ready to dive into some deep theological waters today?
Always up for a deep dive? What you got for us this time?
Well, we're going to be tackling the afterlife.
Okay, going big. I like it. Always a fascinating topic. Lots of different interpretations out there.
Right, and today we're looking at a particular spin on things.
Ah.
It's from this YouTube channel, Bible Stories, they call themselves.
Okay, I think I've seen some of their stuff before. They tend to get into some pretty interesting territory, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And they've got this whole series about, well, life in hell.
Life in hell. Okay, that's definitely attention grabbing.
It is, right?
Yeah.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I just want to say, this is just one interpretation, We're here to explore ideas, not tell you what to believe.
Absolutely. Always good to keep a critical mind, especially when dealing with these kinds of, weighty topics.
Exactly. So, with that said, let's jump in. The first thing that really caught my eye about their take on hell is, well, they claim it's actually empty right now.
Empty.
Yeah.
Like no one there at all.
That's what they say. And it really threw me for a loop because, I always thought souls get judged and sent to either heaven or hell right after they die.
Yeah, that's the traditional understanding for a lot of folks.
But this channel, they're basing their interpretation on the idea of a final judgment, like a big event that hasn't happened yet.
Interesting. So they're saying there might be some kind of afterlife experience before that final judgment, but the eternal hellfire, that comes later.
That seems to be their point, yeah. So it's like the sentence is passed, but the punishment, the real punishment, it's on hold for now.
Huh. What do you make of that?
I don't know. It's definitely something to think about, isn't it? Makes you wonder what God's justice is all about. Like, is it immediate or is there something more to it?
And it makes you wonder what's going on in the meantime, before that final judgment. Where are these souls hanging out?
Right, and that's where their whole three-realm concept comes in.
3 realms.
Yeah, they say the afterlife, at least before that final judgment, is divided into 3 distinct places. Hades, Tartarus, and, the lake of fire.
Okay, so we're going beyond the simple heaven or hell binary here.
Way beyond. And trust me, it gets pretty wild. So let's start with Hades. What's their take on this first realm?
Well, they use that parable of the rich man and Lazarus, from the Gospel of Luke, to kind of illustrate what they mean.
Ah, right, the one where the rich guy ignores the poor guy at his gate.
Exactly. Both of them die, and the rich guy ends up in torment, while Lazarus is chilling in comfort.
And there's that uncrossable chasm between them.
Yeah, very dramatic imagery, right? Mm-hmm. So basically their point is, Hades is like a divided waiting room.
Like a cosmic purgatory?
Kinda, yeah. You experience consequences based on how you lived your life, but you're also, waiting for that final judgment.
And they connect this to Sheol, right? The Hebrew word for, the realm of the dead.
That's right. They point out that in the Old Testament, Sheol wasn't always seen as a place of punishment. More like just the place where everyone went after death.
Righteous and unrighteous alike.
Exactly. But the point is, both Hades and Sheol suggest this sort of in-between state. You're not in heaven, you're not in hell, you're just waiting.
So it's not just about where you end up, but also what you experience while you're waiting.
Right, and that gets to the heart of this whole idea of judgment and accountability, even before that final reckoning.
It makes you think, huh?
It really does. But hold on, because it gets even more interesting when they introduce this second realm.
Tartarus.
Tartarus. Now, that's not a name you hear every day. Sounds like something out of Greek myth.
And that's no coincidence. This YouTube channel, they're not afraid to mix things up, bringing in elements from outside the Bible to build their picture of the afterlife.
So what is Tartarus in their view?
Well, they point out that it is mentioned in the Bible, in 2 Peter, I think, but it's often associated with, imprisonment and punishment, specifically for fallen angels. Fallen angels, like the ones who rebelled against God.
Exactly.
So we're not just talking about human souls here. There's a whole other level of, supernatural beings involved.
That's right. And they're suggesting Tartarus is a place of even greater torment than Hades.
Wow. Okay, so we've got Hades, this divided waiting room, and now Tartarus, this super intense prison for fallen angels. And I'm guessing the third realm is where the classic hellfire and brimstone comes in.
You got it.
Yeah.
The lake of fire. The grand finale, if you will.
And that, my friends, is where we'll pick up next time. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everyone. As we were talking about Hades, this whole idea of a divided waiting room with different experiences for the righteous and the unrighteous, I started thinking, what does that actually mean? Like, what's it like to be there?
Yeah, good point. It's not like they gave us a brochure or anything.
Right. I mean, we know the rich guy from the parable, he's definitely not having a good time. But what about Lazarus? What's his experience like?
Yeah, what's going on in the good part of town?
Well, that's where things get a little fuzzy, right? The YouTube channel, they draw on some imagery from the Bible, but it's still pretty open to interpretation.
So what do they say about Lazarus? Is he just hanging out, waiting for the final judgment?
Well, they point out that he finds comfort, solace. Some folks interpret that as kind of paradise,
Mm-hmm.
peaceful, restful in God's presence.
So even before the final judgment, there's a sense of, like, a preview of what's to come.
Yeah, that seems to be the idea. A taste of the ultimate consequences.
Makes you think about the purpose of that experience. Is it all about punishment? Or is there something more to it?
Right. Like maybe some kind of purification, a chance to really face the consequences of your actions.
And maybe even, I don't know, repent. Even if you didn't accept Christ in this life.
Now, that's a really interesting thought. The video doesn't really get into that, but it's worth considering, right?
Yeah, if no one's in the lake of fire yet, that means there's still potential for change, right? Even after death.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It really challenges our ideas about judgment, about God's mercy.
I like it. Adds a whole other dimension to how we think about the afterlife. It's not just a static thing, but a process, maybe.
Yeah, a process of growth, transformation.
I dig it. But let's circle back to Tartarus for a minute. We were talking about how it's got that Greek mythology vibe, right?
Right. And I think that's significant because it shows how this channel is bringing in different sources, not just the Bible.
Yeah, like weaving a bigger picture.
Exactly. What's your take on Tartarus, though? What do you find particularly unsettling about it?
Honestly, the fact that it's for fallen angels, it's one thing for humans to mess up, right? But these beings were close to God. They knew better.
And yet they rebelled.
Yeah. And now they face a level of torment that even demons are scared of. That's heavy stuff.
No kidding. It really emphasizes the consequences of choosing evil, even for those who, were once in God's good graces.
Makes you think twice about your choices, doesn't it?
It does. And it's not just about physical suffering either, right? Remember how those demons begged Jesus not to send them into the abyss?
Yeah, they were terrified.
It's like they understood that being separated from God, being cut off from that source of love and light, that's the real torment.
Chilling stuff. So we've got Hades, this divided waiting room, Tartarus, this intense prison for fallen angels, and then, of course, there's the Lake of Fire.
The ultimate
It's
destination.
a big one. And that's where things get really apocalyptic, right?
You could say that. They really go all in on the Book of Revelation imagery with this one. Fire, torment, the second death. It's a lot to process.
And it's not just for people, right? The
Yeah.
beast, the false prophet, even Satan himself, they all end up in the Lake of Fire.
Yeah, it's presented as this final, decisive victory of good over evil, a purging of everything bad.
But honestly, I have to admit, this whole idea of eternal torment, it's hard to wrap my head around.
Me too. Like, how do you square that with the idea of a loving God?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries, right? If God is truly merciful, how can anyone suffer eternally? It's tough to reconcile. It is. But I guess that's why we're having this conversation, right? To wrestle with these tough questions, to try to make sense of it all.
Exactly. This YouTube channel gives us one perspective, but it's not the only one.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. We're exploring different ideas, different interpretations.
Like challenging our own beliefs.
Absolutely. But let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. If we take this vision of hell seriously, with all its realms and eternal consequences, what does it mean for those who've already passed on? Like, where are they now?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back, and I gotta say, my head is still spinning a little bit from all this talk about Hades and Tartarus and the Lake of Fire.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it? But out of everything we've discussed, the thing that really sticks with me is that question of where those who've already passed on, where are they now in this whole system?
Right, like if no one's actually in the Lake of Fire yet because the final judgment hasn't happened, what does that mean for those who, well, maybe didn't live the most righteous lives?
Exactly. Are they just suffering in Hades, waiting for that final judgment? It seems kind of harsh, doesn't it?
It does, especially if we're talking about a God who is all about love and mercy. Wouldn't there be a chance for, I don't know, some kind of redemption, even after death?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, the video doesn't really address that directly.
So we're left hanging. They give us this whole detailed map of the afterlife, but no real guidance on what happens to the souls who are, well, in limbo.
I think that's part of what makes this whole thing so fascinating. It forces us to grapple with the mystery, to confront our own beliefs about what happens after we die.
Yeah, I guess you're right. So let's try to unpack this a little. If we stick with this three-realm interpretation, what might be happening to those souls in Hades as they wait for the final judgment?
Well, one possibility is that they just kind of stay as they are, experiencing the consequences of their actions, but with no real chance for change until that final judgment day arrives.
Like they're in a holding pattern, spiritually speaking.
Exactly. And that kind of fits with a certain view of divine justice, the idea that things are fixed and unchanging.
But honestly, that doesn't really sit right with me. I mean, if God's love is truly limitless, wouldn't there be room for, well, for growth, for change, even in the afterlife?
That's a really good point. And it leads to another interpretation that a lot of theologians and philosophers have talked about, the idea that Hades isn't just about punishment, but also purification.
Like a cosmic refining process?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A chance for souls to continue to learn and grow, to maybe even repent of their past actions.
So even though they didn't, say, accept Christ during their earthly life, they could still find redemption after death.
It's a possibility, right? And it speaks to a much more expansive view of God's mercy, a belief that the story isn't over just because we die.
I like that. It feels a lot more hopeful and honestly a lot more in line with the God I believe in. But it also makes me think about the whole concept of time in the afterlife. Like, if time as we know it doesn't really exist there, what does it even mean to be waiting for something?
Yeah, that's a head scratcher, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not like waiting in line at the grocery store. Maybe it's a completely different experience of time, one that allows for the kind of profound growth and transformation that just wouldn't be possible in our limited human lifespans.
So it's not about sitting around twiddling your thumbs.
Not necessarily.
It's more like, an ongoing journey.
Yeah, maybe. A journey of coming to terms with your choices, understanding their consequences, and maybe even finding healing and reconciliation.
No, that's an idea I can get behind. It turns the whole concept of hell on its head, doesn't it? It's not a static destination, but a dynamic process. And it makes me think if hell can be about growth and change, then maybe heaven isn't just a static paradise either.
Right. Maybe it's a place where we can continue to evolve, to learn, to draw closer to God in ways we can't even imagine right now.
Wow, so many possibilities. Well, as much as I'd love to keep pondering these mysteries, I think we've got to wrap things up for today.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
Hmm.
But I think it's important to remember that this is just one interpretation of hell, and a pretty wild one at that.
Exactly. And ultimately, what we believe about the afterlife is deeply personal. It's shaped by our own experiences, our faith traditions, our hopes, and maybe even our fears.
Absolutely. But no matter what you believe, I hope this conversation has at least sparked some curiosity, made you think about things in a new way.
That's what we're all about here at the Deep Dive. So keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep searching for those deeper truths. And hey, who knows what you might discover along the way? Thanks for joining us.